Hello, welcome to this workshop. Shame-free self-promotion can help to advance your career. In a moment or two, I'm going to pop up a slide, and some of you may be surprised by the words on the slide. And this is to get you to start thinking about what self-promotion actually is. So are you ready? Here we go. It's not bragging if it's based on facts. Now, some of you may well be very surprised by this, but remember that self-promotion is not bragging. And the reason it's not bragging or showing off is because it is based on facts. My name is Sophie Edmund, and I am the founder of the Art of Women's Leadership. I've got over 35 years working in corporate world, and as you can see, I identify as a woman, and so I have had my fair share of experiences that I would really like to share with you. So today's session is around getting you to start thinking about how you can self-promote. By the end of today's session, you will have these takeaways. I'm going to have a look at your unique accomplishments and achievements, and you would have already started doing this as part of your pre-work, and you'll need the sheet for an exercise later on. How you can use these achievements and accomplishments to improve your motivation to self-promote, because believe me, I know it can be hard. And it's also about you having some raised levels of confidence so that you feel that you can actively self-promote to advance your career. So let's start exploring some of these. One of the first things I'd like to explore is why this is seen as being shameful. And there's a couple of reasons. The first one is conditioning. So what happens is, over generations and generations, boys have been conditioned to be leaders, to be competitive, whereas girls have been conditioned to be a little bit more subservient and to be nice and kind. And so what's happened is that when they grow up and become women, some of that conditioning is still there. Another reason why it's seen as shameful is because of biases. So I'm going to introduce you now to some biases. These come from some research by Stanford University and are quoted on leanin.org, which is founded by Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook fame. So let me explain each one of these to you and the impact that it has on women. And you've probably heard of some of these already. Let's start off with unconscious bias. So what happens is that our brains take in far more information they can ever process. And so what we have to do is we have to rely on mental shortcuts to simplify the world around us. And sometimes that means relying on stereotypes. And sometimes these mental shortcuts can actually be really helpful. So if you can imagine that you're walking in a wood, a forested area, and you see in the corner of your eye a creature. It looks pretty big. You don't know what it is, and it's starting to run towards you. So you don't stop and think whether it's a bear, a dog, a fox, a hare. You just run for it. You have to make that snap judgment. But if we use that snap judgment when it comes to people, it can be really, really harmful. Some experts at Harvard developed what's called the IAT, the Implicit Association Test. And this was designed to better understand some of the biases, common biases that we hold. And are you ready for some results? Because they are really eye-opening. So 76% of participants more readily associate men with career and women with family, regardless of their own gender. And 75% of participants show a preference for white people over black people. And this is even true for half of the black participants. It can be really hard to admit that we have these biases because we don't want to be seen as falling into these traps. But none of us are immune from bias. And that means that we've all got some work to do. Just to remind you as well that people of all genders fall into biases. It isn't just men. And knowing that this unconscious bias exists isn't enough. We need to look out for it and we need to take some steps to counteract it. Performance bias. Again, this is deep-rooted assumptions about men and women's abilities. We tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimate men's performance. So as a result, women often have to accomplish more to show that they're equally as competent as men. And this is why studies show that women are often hired based on past accomplishments, because we need to see the proof they've got the right skills, whereas men are often hired on future potential, because we're already assuming they've got the skills that they need. It can also have a big impact on hiring decisions. Sometimes what happens is in those hiring decisions, people are left to rely on gut feelings and personal conclusions, which means that, of course, bias can influence those decisions. And what happens is that performance bias can often lead to women having missed opportunities and lower performance ratings. And of course, both of those can have a massive impact on female career progression. Attribution bias. This is closely linked to performance bias because we tend to think that women are less competent. We give them less credit for accomplishments and we are more likely to blame them for their mistakes. Yes, I know, I hear you, but we have to remember that this is what is going on in our heads. So this attribution bias is really common when women are talking because they are more likely to be talked over and interrupted in meetings. And some of you may have experienced this because I know I certainly have. And it's really, really frustrating and annoying. In one particular study, men interrupted women nearly 3 times as often as they interrupted other men. And women are also far more likely to interrupt other women, but less likely to interrupt men. Isn't that fascinating? And so what happens is that women are held to higher standards, they tend to receive less credit, and they exercise less influence. And of course, that has an impact on their confidence. And you may have heard about the study before, where women are also less likely to apply for roles or for promotion. Men will typically apply for a promotion or a new role when they meet 60% of the criteria, whereas a lot of women, if not the majority of women, will wait until they meet 100%. And so what happens is that not only is confidence holding back, we hold women to higher standards than men. And so, of course, women might rightfully feel they have to hit that higher bar. Moving on to likability bias, also known as the likability penalty. So because women, what happens is that women often face a social penalty when they assert themselves, and it doesn't impact the men. Again, it's rooted in age-old expectations of men and women. We expect men to be assertive, so when they do take the lead, it feels natural to us. And sometimes if we expect, and in contrast, if women take the lead, they can be seen as aggressive or bossy. And so there is this expectation that women tend to be kind and communal. Sometimes what happens is that if you experience a woman being bossy, aggressive, intimidating, words that are very rarely used to describe men in the workplace, we may have a negative response to that woman. And so, of course, being well liked does really matter. Women also pay a penalty for being likable. If they're seen as agreeable and nice, we sometimes consider them to be less competent. And so what happens is we have the double bind. So it's making the workplace challenging for women because they need to be seen to assert themselves to be effective. But when they do, they tend to be less liked. For whatever reason, men do not walk that particular same tightrope. which is terribly frustrating. Maternal bias. Now, of course, it doesn't impact everybody, but you may be surprised to hear that it is the strongest kind of gender bias. So when a woman becomes a mother, it triggers some assumptions that she is less committed to her career and less competent. It can then add fuel to the performance bias that women are already facing. And so what happens is that mothers are often given fewer opportunities and held to much higher standards than fathers. And we fall into this trap of thinking, she's a mum now, she's not interested in her career anymore because she's got kids. We also make assumptions they might not want that challenging assignment or to relocate or go on a big work trip. Because we think they're less committed, we are then more likely to penalise them for their mistakes or oversights. And there's also some research that shows that if a woman puts PTA coordinator, so PTA stands for Parent Teacher Association, to do with schools, if that role is added to her resume or CV, she is 79% less likely to be hired. She's half as likely to be promoted, and she's offered an average of $11,000 less in salary. Now, the really interesting thing is that maternal bias starts really early. So as soon as a woman gets engaged, they face pushback because we assume they're going to have children. And it's really interesting because a number of years ago, I'd moved towns, and so I was looking for a job closer to my new home. And this was in the days before women could not be asked about their plans for a family. So I was sitting in an interview, and this man of a particular age asked me a question, said, "So why are you looking to move jobs?" And I explained to him that I'd not long got married and we'd moved towns. And he said to me, "Oh, that means you're going to be leaving to have a baby soon then, aren't you?" And of course, I was astounded, and I could just see some of your faces. This did happen, and this was probably about 30 years ago. Things have changed dramatically, but the point is that maternal bias was there. Finally, affinity bias. It's exactly what it sounds like. We tend to gravitate people who are like ourselves. We look at people who are similar in appearance, beliefs and background, and we tend to avoid or dislike the people who are different from us. And it's interesting because hiring managers are also more likely to spend time interviewing people who are like them and less time getting to know people who are different. So, of course, not surprisingly, they're more likely to give people like them a favourable evaluation. And it's also another interesting perspective. Because white men generally hold more positions of power and are more likely to gravitate towards other white men, affinity bias has a particular negative effect on women and people of colour. They just end up being left out or getting overlooked. So I really wanted to remind you that people of all genders fall into these bias traps, and it's not just men. But we also have to recognise that these biases exist, but we need to look for it and commit to taking steps to counteract it. So why do we need to self-promote? Well, it seems very easy to do it for somebody else. And we, a lot of the time, are more than happy to do it for somebody else, to give them praise, to give them feedback, to call them out, to say, "You did a great job there. Well done on that presentation. Well done on that piece of work." Another reason why we need to self-promote is that our accomplishments don't speak for themselves. We have to be known at the right places and known to the right people. And I'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. There's also some financial and commercial benefits for you personally and for the organisation that you're working for if you self-promote. Because you are a woman or you identify as a woman, if there are more women, then it's good for business. And what I mean by that is that employees on diverse teams are more committed and they work harder, which is great news. Companies with more women in them generally, and in particular in leadership positions, produce better business results. So companies more female board members overperformed others by 53%. So it really does pay to have women in organisations. And of course, the biggest reason for self-promotion is that if you don't do it, it could be holding you back from career success. So there are some real compelling reasons why you should be self-promoting. So what are the tools for career success? So you can see here there are 3 keys to career success. Now, some of you may be looking at this going, wow, I didn't know that. Oh my goodness me, that's a surprise. I thought my performance was the main reason. I'm sure there's all sorts of things going on in your heads right now. This comes from a book by Harvey Coleman called Empowering Yourself, The Organizational Game Revealed. And it was published in the 90s. And even though it's 15, 20 years old, it is still really, really important to remember that for career success, you need to be thinking about PI: performance, image, exposure. So let me explain what each of these mean. Performance. As you can see, it accounts for 10%. And what this means is that how well you do your job actually has very little to do with how successful you are in your professional career. And the performance is the tasks that you do on a daily basis. So how well you do your prescribed work only contributes and accounts for about 10% of your overall success. Now, it's not to say that it's not important. Of course it's important, but it's to remember that if you want to be successful in your career, doing a good job every day only counts for 10%. The next piece of the pie is I, image. That accounts for about 30%. So it's about what other people think of you or your personal brand. And again, it might be worthwhile you having some conversations with people that you trust at work and asking them, what do people say about me when I'm not in the room? Because that is what is your personal brand. So again, a couple of things for you to think about. Are you the type of person that leads with solutions? Or are you the type of person that offers roadblocks? What is your attitude at work? Because again, that has a really important part to play. Of course, we have bad days. We all have bad days. But equally, we also have some fantastic and some great days. So really start thinking about how you're behaving at work and what that behaviour is portraying to your colleagues and to those of importance around you. The third part of the pie is E, the largest part, the exposure, 60%. I know it's massive, isn't it? The exposure piece is about your visibility. So who knows about you? What do people say about you? Do people know what you do? Does your boss know what you do? Does their boss know what you do? Do people inside and outside your organisation know anything about you? So it's really, really key that you become visible. And I know for some of you, you're going to be sitting there cringing and getting really uncomfortable. It's about making some choices and about changing our mindset. Because if you don't change your mindset, your behaviour won't change. If you don't change your mindset, your behaviour won't change. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Another thing to also consider about your exposure is when it comes to succession planning or talent management. So your managers can help you, because in succession planning and talent management, they may be having conversations. And certainly when I was working in those types of roles, we would often have conversations once or twice a year about people in the pipeline. A name would get mentioned. And straight away, most, if not all of the people around the table, the line manager, HR, myself, talent development, we say, oh yes, Jane, she's done really, really well. She's worked on this project. She presented, and we know exactly who we're speaking about. Another name might get mentioned. Sarah. Oh, don't know who Sarah is. Never seen her. Don't know anything about her. Her line manager's saying, but Sarah's great. The rest of us around the table don't know who Sarah is. So it's in your interests to become more visible. Now, a good manager can help you to get good exposure, but they can't do it all for you. You have to take some personal accountability. Because how can people leverage your magic if they don't know what you do? So really start thinking about how you could become more visible in your organisation. It's also about owning your space and stepping up into owning that space. Because if you think about it, you can step up. And I've got a little acronym for stepping up. It's about using your strengths. It's about your tenacity, your resilience. It's about feeling empowered. And it's also about being people-focused. And so if you think about how you can own your space and how you can step up, so I'll do those again, your strengths, your tenacity, feeling empowered, and people-focused, that can help you to become more visible. Now, I'm going to put a picture up, and I want to see, I'm sure we've all experienced this. And this is my interpretation of imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome, some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have experienced it, is a really challenging thing to overcome. And so the reason that I've put this picture up, it feels like we just want to hide, we want to stay in bed. So let me explain what imposter syndrome is. It's a psychological pattern of behaviour where people doubt their accomplishments and their achievements, and they have this persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. They might also tell themselves things like, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be here, I'm going to get found out. All these various negative type messages. And it was originally thought to apply just to high achieving women, but it's been recognised as being applicable to everybody, men and women. And it was really interesting because a couple of Christmases ago, I was having a chat with my brother, my younger brother, who is a chartered civil engineer, and he left that career a number of years ago to set up a cider making business. So cider is the fermented juice of apples. And he was very, very successful at it. And we were having a discussion about imposter syndrome. I was telling him a story about imposter syndrome hit me. And I said, oh, it's all right for you guys. And he went, what? He said, I've had imposter syndrome. And I said, what do you mean you've had imposter syndrome? I said, you're a man. He said, yes, men get it too. And there are some recognisable people that have had it. So let me give you some names. Albert Einstein, Tom Hanks, Serena Williams, Sheryl Sandberg. I know, I was really surprised to read that too. So over 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at least once in their lives. So let me give you an idea of what some of the signs and symptoms are. So you may not realise that you're experiencing imposter syndrome. There is this fear of failure, some negative self-talk. So what I mean by that is some voices in your head saying, I'm not good enough, it's not going to work. Dwelling on past mistakes. Remember that we learn from our mistakes. It's a great development opportunity. A terror of being found out. Perfectionism or comparison. Procrastination and over preparing. So some of you may have experienced some of those things. Now, if imposter syndrome is not addressed, it can stop people taking on new challenges, tasks and roles. It can also have a massive impact on your self-confidence. It can also cause stress, anxiety, exhaustion, and even depression. And of course, all of those have a negative impact on our health, our well-being, our relationships, and in this context, our career prospects. So what can you do if imposter syndrome strikes? So let me give you some ideas. And just before I do that, I wanted to share this with you. I'll let you have a read for a moment. Because it's about working our muscle memory, and it's about getting the thoughts in our head changing and going from I can't do this or I'm not to I am, I can do this. So it's really, really important to start changing what's going on in here. I know it's not easy to do, but think about what you can do. And here are some tips and techniques on how to deal with the dreaded imposter syndrome and how to beat it, more importantly. So acknowledge it and accept it. So say, yes, I know this is going on for me, and take it on board and saying, yes, it's happening. And I think, again, that is one of the big things that you can do that will really, really help to say, okay, put it in the box, it's there. The next thing is about managing your inner critic. Now, this is your self-talk. And as I described earlier, that little voice that says, you're not good enough, I can't do this, you're going to get found out. Some of you may be laughing at those voices, but that's what it sounds like in my head sometimes. And there's lots of different ways of dealing with that inner critic. So one of the ways is basically telling it to go away or shut up. And some of you may have read The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters. And he talks about this chimp that sits on your shoulder and talks to you. And so what I've done is I can imagine this chimp and I basically can knock it off and it goes away, figuratively. Or I can tell it to shut up and go away. And sometimes you have to really be quite forthright with that critic. Another way of dealing with the negative self-talk is to write it out. Write out everything that is going on for you around that inner critic. And then take it, rip it up and put it in the bin. Because the challenge is that if it's sitting in your head, it's constantly going round and round and round and round. So if you offload it, download it, then it gives your head some space to think about. And if you hear yourself saying, I can't do this, flip it into I can do this. The next way to beat imposter syndrome is to learn to accept compliments. Okay, sometimes we find that so hard to do. If somebody compliments you on something, say thank you. What we tend to do is somebody pays us a compliment and we say, oh, it's just, oh, it wasn't much. We tend to bat it away. Take them on board, enjoy them. It really is a nice thing to receive. Adopt a growth mindset. And what we mean by that is being pushed out of your comfort zone. I know it hurts and it is really, really hard work to be pushed out of your comfort zone. But sometimes being pushed out of that comfort zone is the best way of growing and developing, and of course, contributing towards your career success. You can ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. It is not a sign of weakness. We all need help. And so find somebody that you trust and ask them to support you and help you. And one of the best ways of doing that is by asking some open questions. What, when, how, when. Embrace imposter syndrome, which sounds really, really counterintuitive, but take it on board and say, okay, I hear you. I'm going to accept this for now, but then find another way of working through it. And then another way is by listing your achievements. And so this is where I'm going to ask you to start thinking and pulling out your workbook, because we're going to use that in a couple of minutes. And the big thing here here is about your achievements, your successes, your strengths, and recognizing how amazing you are. And I know for some of you, this can be a little bit challenging, but you need to remember that you are one amazing human being with some strengths, some achievements, some accomplishments that are unique to you. And so what I'd like to do is start thinking about how you can change your mindset, work that muscle, a bit like you do in the gym. You do your repetitions and you get better and better and better as you do more and more and more, you develop strength. So start using that muscle memory. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to list out all of the reasons why you are amazing. So I am amazing because, okay? And it can be anything to do with work, anything to do with your home life, anything to do with your personal life, anything to do with your past life, as in education, qualifications, anything you've done, because these are facts that are true to you. So I'll give you 5 minutes to work through this, and I'll see you shortly. Okay, so if you want to start wrapping up, and remember, you are amazing for lots of different reasons. And one of the ways that you could use this is by saying it out loud. And because, again, that then helps the muscle memory to work. So you can find a quiet space, out on a walk, in your bedroom, wherever it is that works for you, to remind yourself why you are amazing. And what you can also do is you can encourage your colleagues at work, and you can support others that promote who promote themselves. And again, you might have felt uncomfortable, but really start thinking about working that muscle memory so that you can share your achievements and your accomplishments. You might want to also set up a group at work, so where you have a group of friends or like-minded colleagues where on a fortnightly, monthly basis, you share your achievements, because again, it then helps to build that muscle memory. An amazing achievements group, because practicing and perfecting it is really, really helpful. And again, you can practice with 2 or 3 trusted colleagues. Also, keep adding into your ta-da book, into your bragging book, into your achievements book, all the different things that you've got. For example, I've got to the side of my laptop here the amazing clients that I've worked with and some of the feedback, because it reminds me on a bad day how amazing I am, and you are too. So if you do choose to use these tools and to start doing some more self-promotion, remember that what you're doing is you're selling yourself. And again, for some of you, that might feel a bit uncomfortable. But think of it this way. In business, you're always trying to sell something, an idea, a service. You're trying to influence somebody and you're trying to persuade somebody. And so if you reframe it as, how can I add value, or what value can I offer that the other person could benefit from? And what you also might want to do is see if you can sell yourself to yourself. So if you're presented with a challenge, then come up with a list of facts or evidence that remind you can do this, that you can provide a solution, and that you've got this. Another way is by asking open questions and listening. Get curious about what people's needs are and their interest. And then you can use your knowledge and your experience to then self-promote in a subtle way. So a few final tips from me. Trust yourself and have that self-belief. Look at how far you have come. You are all amazing, amazing women and people. Another thing to consider is about supporting other women. So step forward, contribute, and be of service to others. And go out there, self-promote, and be shame-free about it. Because remember, it's not bragging if it's based on facts. Thank you very much for attending today and for taking part. If you would like to connect with me, then here are my contact details. If you would also like to leave a recommendation on LinkedIn, that would be awesome. It would be great to connect with you, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.